Burnout is such a classic, iconic racing game series. The series, especially from 3 and beyond, ushered in a new era of speed, destruction, and chaos not quite seen in a game up until that point. The run was legendary. The first 2 laid the foundation, 3 innovated on the formula, Revenge perfected it, and Paradise introduced the series to the open world. About 3 months ago, I decided to run through the entire series and chronicle my thoughts in the video titled, I Played Every Burnout and Here's What I Think. If you haven't watched it yet, please pause this video and go check it out. I'll link it down below in the description. But it got me thinking, Burnout was such a popular series in its heyday, there certainly had to be copycats, right? Think about it. Doom was huge in the 90s and spawned Doom clones like Heretic, Hexen, and Duke 3D. Nowadays we have games that are like Dark Souls, Souls-likes, games like Lies of P or Remnant from the Ashes. My point being, clones, likes, whatever you want to call them, I thought there had to be developers who saw Burnout and thought, we can do that too, can't we? Well, surprisingly no. I had a bit of trouble coming up with this list and I had to make some concessions, but some of these games aren't exactly clones, but I thought they either fit the aesthetic, they fit the tone, the level of destruction. They had something that grabbed my attention as a Burnout fan. I found a few games that fit the bill, but I've decided to narrow them down to just 5 for today's video. Today I'll be covering 1 game from the creators of Burnout Criterion, 1 game from developers who left Criterion and formed their own studio, and 3 games from 3 different unrelated studios. This isn't a definitive list by any means, this is just for fun. Beyond that, I just hope that this video inspires you to go and check out some, if not all, of these racing games from the past. My name is Mercy and I played 5 Burnout clones. Enjoy. Let's kick the video off with, by far, the most requested game since posting my Burnout video, Need for Speed Most Wanted. Now, before I begin, I have to admit I'm not a big fan of the Need for Speed series. It's not that I actively dislike the games or anything like that, it's just that I didn't really grow up with them, and later on in life, I didn't find time to play them. I've never experienced Underground 1 or 2, Pro Street, Carbon, or even the original Most Wanted. Pretty much all of the highest rated games in the series. I know, I'm a terrible person. The only ones I had played before this video were Need for Speed Shift, which I know is a spin-off game, and the most recent games Need for Speed Heat and Need for Speed Unbound, which neither of them really clicked with me. Let me know if you'd like for me to check out the rest of the series sometime. I'm completely open to that. But for now, let's check out Need for Speed Most Wanted. Need for Speed Most Wanted released on October 30th, 2012 for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, PC, and Vita. It was later released for Wii U on March 19th, 2013. I'll be playing the PC version of the game today. Most Wanted takes place in the city of Fairhaven, a city dominated by the 10 most badass racers in town called the Most Wanted. Your goal is to claw your way up those ranks and become the top racer in Fairhaven. It's a simple, straightforward concept, and I like that. I've never really felt that racing games need a strong narrative, and if they do have a narrative, I'm glad when it's out of the way. So, how exactly do you challenge the Most Wanted? Well, each tier of driver has a set number of speed points you have to accumulate before you can challenge them. Speed points, or SP, are essentially just experience points and are earned by doing various tasks around town. These can be as extensive as a multi-lap race through downtown or as simple as blasting through a billboard in the open world. The SP payouts differ depending on the task at hand, but it always feels like you're doing something to work your way towards moving up the Most Wanted list. Let's start with the longer events, like races for example. I say longer, but they're not terribly long, maybe 5 to 10 minutes tops. Each event has 3 different tiers to completion: bronze, silver, and gold. Beyond bragging rights with your friends, getting a gold medal ensures that you receive all of the rewards for the event. Bronze pays out the bare minimum SP, silver gives a little more SP plus a customization part, gold pays out all of those plus even more SP and another part on top of that. A big part of the progression system in Most Wanted is not only getting new cars, but upgrading the ones you already have. The customization parts are for the car that you choose to partake in the event with, and they're upfront about what you're going to get before you enter the event. They can range from, say, track tires so your car is grippier on asphalt but worse off-road, or longer gear so your car has a higher top speed at the cost of slower acceleration. There's nothing saying you can't use one car the entire game and just keep upgrading it with new parts, but that's so boring to me. There are so many different cars in Most Wanted. Why not experiment and try out the others? Finding cars was actually one of my favorite things to do in Most Wanted, just driving around looking for what the game calls jack spots. Jack spots are pretty much just random cars parked around Fairhaven ready to be taken. It's as simple as driving up to them, pressing a button, and voila, it's added to your roster. It gave me a nice break from the usual hustle and bustle seen in the rest of the game. I really like the variety of different vehicles here too, from muscle cars, sports cars, supercars, and trucks. All of them are licensed too, from manufacturers like Porsche, Nissan, Ford, and more. The cars are modeled beautifully and they sound great. Take a listen. I found one of my favorite cars of all time, the Ford GT, fairly early, so I upgraded it pretty substantially throughout my playthrough. That's not to say I didn't use and upgrade other cars I like the Aston Martin Vantage for example, but it's the one I spent the most time using. With licensed cars, there are, of course, limitations on what the developers can and cannot do with them, but thankfully I think they've done a good job of balancing those limitations. The destruction, for example, isn't as good as it was in Burnout, but it's still solid. It's more than just the bare minimum, which I consider scrapes to the paint and maybe a bumper hanging off somewhere. Windows will bust out and sparks fly off when metal rubs on metal or concrete. The cars just don't deform like they do in Burnout, and that's a shame. Unlike the cars though, Fairhaven is a very destructible city. It's not like you'll be taking down buildings or anything, but there are breakable props like light poles and benches to drive through. And just like in Burnout Paradise, there are breakable fences, billboards to fly through, and speed cameras to blast by that add to your overall progression. I love breakable props in driving games. It's something I've loved since, I don't know, probably Driver 2 on PlayStation. Progression just feels so natural in Most Wanted. The developers have given you so many different ways to earn SP and work your way up the Most Wanted ladder. The driving itself feels great. The physics aren't quite the same as Burnout, but it still plays wonderfully. I had no issue hitting big drifts or taking corners at high speeds. Different surfaces like asphalt or dirt, for example, they each feel different and they require different types of cars and part combinations to maximize your speed. In Most Wanted, you have a boost gauge and you build it up in a similar way to Burnout by drifting, jumping, driving in an oncoming lane, near missing traffic, all of that good stuff. But most importantly, takedowns are back. The game has takedowns, and they're pretty dang cool, but I have to say they're not as cool as they are in Burnout. So when taking down an opponent in Burnout, the game would cut away and you'd see the carnage you committed, before the camera quickly shot back behind your car and you were on your way. In Most Wanted, nothing of the sort happens. Instead, a notification pops up stating what kind of takedown you performed, how much SP it paid out, and that's it. It's pretty lame, but I guess you can make the argument that it keeps the focus on the race, but I don't love it. Even worse, when you yourself crash, you'll be given that crash cam. So it's already in the game. Just show it to me when I take down my opponents. Come on. Another lacking component to the cars is the absence of proper visual customization. I know that in previous Need for Speed titles, you could adjust things like ride height, wheels, interiors, window tint, paint, headlight color, underglow. It's just this whole laundry list of things. But in Most Wanted, there's nothing beyond the performance changes I mentioned earlier. The biggest visual change you'll see beyond damage is when you drive through garages to repair your car. These are back from Burnout Paradise and function basically the same. It'll repair your car, fill your boost gauge, and change the color of your car's paint. Not a deal breaker for me, I'm not a big customization guy anyway, but I kinda just get a car in these games, change the exhaust, swap the wheels and paint, and go on about my way. I figured I should mention it either way, it's a big part of previous Need for Speed games. All in all, Need for Speed Most Wanted is a wonderful follow-up to Burnout Paradise, and I'm glad that I had so many of you guys recommending it to me. I do have some gripes with it, but ultimately they don't severely detract from my experience. Throughout my review, I repeatedly said this is good, but not as good as Burnout Paradise. And that's how I feel about Need for Speed Most Wanted. It's a good game, but not as good as Burnout Paradise. It's a solid follow-up, I had fun with it, and I recommend it. If you enjoyed Paradise and you're itching for more of that, this is exactly the game for you. It's without a doubt one of the better Burnout clones on this list. Moving on, I'd like to talk about dangerous driving. Before I get into the game, I want to talk a little bit about the developer, 3 Fuel. Fields Entertainment. The company was founded in early 2014 by a few former developers at Criterion who were, among other things I'm sure, fed up with the culture at EA. Since forming the studio, they've released a few different Burnout-inspired successors. Dangerous Golf, which attempts to put a spin on Burnout's crash mode, except with a golf ball. It's pretty fun. Danger Zone 1 and 2, which attempts to emulate Burnout's crash mode a bit closer to mixed results in my eyes, as well as to focus for today's video, Dangerous Driving. Dangerous Driving released on April 9th, 2019 for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. I'll be playing the PC version of the game today. Now, if their previous attempts were focused on crash mode, Dangerous Driving forgoes this entirely and focuses on the racing aspect of Burnout. And just like the previously mentioned Danger Zone, the results are mixed. It's pretty obvious comparing this game side by side to Burnout 3 that this is the game they're trying to recreate. Every mode from Burnout 3 is here, like the races, road rage, eliminators, preview showcases, and they even added Pursuit from Burnout 2. It's a nice touch. The progression is basically the same too, earning bronze, silver, or gold medals in each event to later unlock a GP, which then once completed unlocks the next, faster class of vehicles. Even looking at the UI, Dangerous Driving is a more modern, minimalistic version of the UI used in Burnout 3. My problem isn't with the structure, the progression, it's nothing like that. I'm not saying it's great or anything, but it's perfectly fine. The game on paper checks nearly every single box that a Burnout successor needs to check. However, my issue with Dangerous Driving is right there in its title. The driving itself is just not an enjoyable experience, and there isn't just one standout reason why. It's a collection of strange choices that add up to a mediocre gameplay experience. That's not to say that it doesn't have its upsides, it certainly does. The sense of speed can be really great, especially late into the career mode where you get access to supercars. The motion blur on the racing surface and your surroundings look pretty good. I like how the camera pans back and widens your field of view as you use boost. It's a nice touch too. I also like the fact that this game has a crash cam, unlike Most Wanted, so thank you. Just, I don't know, it's something about seeing cars tumble and fly around is just good dumb fun, right? Unfortunately though, what I don't like about Dangerous Driving is just about everything else. Let's start with the physics. Cars are seemingly glued to the circuit. Even when you're pounding that boost button, the rear end never loses grip. Even on the faster cars like the Formula cars, for example, grip is never lost unless you intentionally tap the brake to slide. Just to be clear, I'm not looking for simulation physics, but this is a clear departure from Burnout 3. In Burnout 3, you could possibly lose rear grip, and then you'd either have to maintain the drift or have to let off the boost, slow down, regain grip, and then get back on the boost. It makes Dangerous Driving a very easy game, and as a result, I think a boring one. I also just don't like the AI. They're way too easy. I was winning some races by 40 seconds at times. It's just ridiculous. This was my first time playing the game for an extended period of time. I don't know the layout of the tracks. I should not be crushing anything. I should be just barely scraping by. They're also just not nearly aggressive enough. I never saw them as a serious threat throughout my playthrough. Most of my wrecks in Dangerous Driving came from my own mistakes, usually crashing into traffic or a guardrail too hard. I found jumps in the game to be really awkward too. Burnout 3 didn't have a ton of big jumps like Revenge or Paradise did, but the car felt like it had some weight to it. You would hit a jump and when you'd land, sparks would fly out and it just felt like the car weighed something. In Dangerous Driving, hitting a jump results in this weird state where your car just kind of floats in a straight line before it softly comes back down to the track. It's like some kind of weird moon gravity or something. It's bizarre. There's no impact with the ground, no sound, really nothing. The tracks in Dangerous Driving are also just so bland and unmemorable, all of them being set out in the country with long straightaways and long winding curves. Part of what made Burnout 3's tracks so exciting and memorable to me were the ones where you were racing through urban environments. Just off the top of my head, I remember this track where it almost immediately had you drive into a hard left or a hard right-hander near the beginning or the end of the track. It just depends on which way the game had you take it. I try to hit a big drift at the top or the bottom and try to carry it up or down that 3 or 4 floors before speeding through an outdoor mall area. I think it was in the Far East. I also remember that track with the overpass that was above you, and there were these huge metal posts on each side of the road and traffic was tightly packed in the middle as you were trying to speed through these intersections. I don't remember the names to either either of these tracks, but they were memorable. They had memorable spots, locales, whatever you want to call it. The variety was awesome, and then on top of that, you had destructible objects like benches and poles, all while having to deal with the other racers who were just aggressive as hell. In Dangerous Driving, there's really nothing of the sort. It's all just rural landscapes with randomly placed objects outside the track, like trees and satellite dishes. I mean, the seasons change between tracks, and some of the locales are different, like you might be in a desert or like an Arctic area, but at this point, who's really even gonna notice? The tracks all end up blending together. They're just lacking personality. They're lacking spice. I don't know how else to say it other than they just aren't memorable. Another thing this game lacks is a proper soundtrack, though it does feature Spotify Premium integration. If you don't have one, well, that's too bad. The game has just one song for you, and this only plays on the menu screens. During races, no music whatsoever, just the sound of your car droning along, broken up by the occasional tire squeal from drifts and the sound of wrecks. Really, take a listen to this. And now, look, I understand that this was more than likely a cost-cutting measure. Really, thinking about it, having Spotify integration is a very clever way of getting around this limitation, but it just rubs me the wrong way. From Burnout 3 on, the series had an incredible licensed soundtrack of musicians, many of which were on small independent labels. So I do question what the budget for this game really was. It's concerning. I just find it hard to believe they couldn't find musicians on Bandcamp or something to license from. We don't need popular, huge songs and musicians in a game. We just need something that fits the mood and the tone. Let the song make the game, and let the game make the song, so to speak. Playing Dangerous Driving made me realize something all along, and that's that I would much rather be playing Burnout again. I'm sorry, but the game just feels so stale, so lifeless, a shell of a game. And look, I'm really not trying to shit on these devs. Game development is hard. I don't know a damn thing about it, and I couldn't do better than the team at Three Fields Entertainment. I'm sure they're all very wonderful people who work very hard. They clearly love Burnout still, and they're trying to give us something that EA sure as hell won't give us, so props to them for that. But I do have to look at this game as it is, a consumer entertainment product. I'm a consumer, you watching, you're a consumer. I feel like we get a say. And as it is, I say you're better off just buying an old PS2 and a copy of Burnout 3. It's obvious that this game was made by a small team. I get that. It was never going to be as good as Burnout 3, and that's fine. I understand that. I never expected it to be that. I really wanted to come away from this game calling it the modern day Burnout though, a proper spiritual successor to the series in its heyday, but instead Dangerous Driving feels like an incomplete, cheap knockoff. I would avoid this one. After that game, I thought we'd pivot away from Criterion and their games and check out the first of 3 third-party games I have planned for today. And I thought there's no better way to kick it off than with arguably the most explosive game on this list, Split Second. Split Second was released on May 18th, 2010 for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC. It was later released on November 17th, 2010 for PSP. I'll be playing the PC version of the game today. Split Second's concept is pretty insane. The idea that you're part of a reality TV show where contestants are racing to become that season's champion. The entire city of Velocity has been built just for the purpose of this TV show. This in itself is such an insane concept to me, that this city was built just to be destroyed by these very same contestants. Throughout your time with Split Second, you'll be triggering all kinds of events called power plays around the map to increase your chances of winning the races by opening up shortcuts, or throwing hazards onto the racing surface, or just changing the layout of the track entirely. I'm telling you, seeing a huge ship slide down the track the first time was a sight to behold. The scale of some of these events is insane, but you can't just trigger these whenever you want. Throughout the race, you'll build your meter up in a similar way to Burnout by drifting or simply by drafting behind an opponent. There are 2 levels to this too. A level 1 power play can be something as simple as an explosive barrel dropping out of a helicopter or a gas station exploding, but level 2 power plays are generally reserved for the more ridiculous events like a tower toppling over to block the raceway. Sometimes I would max my meter out just so I could see some of the crazier events, even if they weren't as beneficial to me as a level 1 power play might have been. This is Split Second's defining feature, and it's an amazing visual spectacle. I also liked how my AI opponents could trigger different events too, so I always had to be on my toes, prepared to take an evasive action to dodge the carnage. Split Second's physics aren't bad either. It facilitates this type of gameplay gameplay that requires quick decision making. At first, I wasn't a big fan of it. I thought that the cars were too understeery and I thought drifting felt a bit off. I kept bouncing my rear end off the walls. But once I got the hang of it, I liked it quite a bit. It's not as limber and loose as Burnout, but I think that works to its advantage. Visually, the game still stuns even today with shiny metallic textures and gritty stylized environments. Explosions look crazy. I love how the game loses its color and the camera shakes when you narrowly avoid a wreck. Another thing I love about this game's visual identity is its lack of a hood. Everything you need to know is right there below your car. Position, power play meter, and lap count, with other information being displayed depending on the mode. Split Second is a lot like Burnout in the sense that it has plenty of modes too. Beyond just racing, one of my favorite modes is called Survival. In Survival, the goal is to pass as many tanker trucks as possible to attain the high score. The tanker trucks are constantly tossing out two kinds of barrels. The blue ones slow you down, and the red ones wreck you. Each time you pass a tanker, you'll earn a bit of time back on your timer and build up your multiplier. Now, when the timer runs out, the game doesn't end, but instead you enter sudden death. Basically, all of the blue barrels stop, and a non-stop onslaught of red barrels spit out to stop you. It's chaotic, intense, and really, it's a ton of fun. I also really enjoy Detonator. In this mode, it's a race against the clock, but Split Second shakes it up by automatically detonating power plays ahead of you. It's pure insanity and essentially a game of trial and error, figuring out how you can maximize your time through various obstacles. Once you figure out a course, it's so badass flying through an area you may have previously slowed your car down for. Speaking of the cars, Split Second has a variety of fictional vehicles to drive, with knockoff muscle cars, supercars, trucks, and more, each with their own pros and cons. Speed, acceleration, drifting ability, and strength all having their own stats. The sound in this game is next level, not just from the cars themselves, but the game is backdropped by this badass action movie soundtrack. I don't know what to call it, but it's sick and fits with this high-octane explosive game well. With all of that said, Split Second is still not my favorite game on this list. Why is that? Well, Split Second's single biggest issue is that it has one of the most egregious rubber banding systems I have ever seen in a video game. Let me explain. So, at first I was dominating this game, easily winning every event, destroying my opponents, just cruising to victory. It was fun, but not challenging in the slightest. I finished a few episodes and I noticed that the difficulty began to ramp up. That's totally fine and what I expect from a game. I want to compete for a top 3, which is Split Second's minimum requirement to progress. If I fail, I'll retry an event a few times to master it. That's totally fine. By episode 8 or 9, I was struggling to even get a top 3 and I had to keep repeating events again and again. I know some people are going to say skill issue, and normally I would agree with you, but I began noticing that being in first on the final lap usually ended up with me failing the event. So I started riding around in second, third, sometimes even fourth, just somewhere near the front where I could trigger a power play near the finish line and quickly make up those positions. Remember, you can't trigger power plays behind you, and the AI gets these random speed boosts out of nowhere. There were times where I'd take out an opponent and 4 or 5 corners later they were flying past me like I was sitting still. I couldn't help but feel like Split Second needed another method of catching up to your opponents outside of power plays. Something like a dedicated boost gauge, or maybe I could spend my power play gauge on boost, or maybe even just a speed boost after hitting a drift like in Mario Kart. I don't know, I'm just spitballing, but ultimately what began as an exciting, explosive, action-packed game devolved into a pretty frustrating experience. I couldn't help but think that my issues with the game could have been solved in a potential sequel or even a future patch, but sadly the developers Black Rock Studio were shut down 1 year later in 2011. Even with that glaring issue I just laid out, I would still recommend Split Second. It's just too much of a visual spectacle to not experience at least once. The level of destruction and the scale of that destruction is incredible. I have not seen it in a game since. You gotta check it out. Next up, we have a game that admittedly is more like a Split Second clone than it is a Burnout one, but I wanted to include it on this list anyway due to its similarities. That game is Motorstorm Apocalypse. Motorstorm Apocalypse released on May 3rd, 2011 exclusively for PlayStation 3. That's the version you're seeing here today. Motorstorm Apocalypse's premise is somehow even crazier than Split Seconds, with racers gathering to compete in the Motorstorm Festival. Unlike the first 2 games, which took place in more deserted, secluded environments, Apocalypse takes place in quote-unquote the city. No, really, the city is the actual name of this place. I think it's supposed to represent San Francisco, I have no idea, but either way, the city sits on a major fault line, so it's frequently hit by earthquakes that have absolutely ravaged and continue to ravage this place, hence the subtitle Apocalypse. The Motorstorm Festival is taking place during an active apocalyptic event, so buildings will crumble, bridges twist and contort, roads collapse under you as you race. It's crazy and chaotic. On top of this, there there are two warring factions in the city that will occasionally take shots at you with small arms, rocket launchers, molotovs, and other weapons. There are parts of the game where helicopters in the air firing miniguns and missiles at you, blowing up your surroundings. Unlike Split Second though, none of this is triggered by you or your opponents, and it's entirely scripted on a per track basis. I like both approaches, but I think Apocalypse's approach allows for crazier, more memorable track designs just because of how scripted it is. You get used to seeing the same thing over and over again. There are parts of certain tracks where you're jumping off a collapsing building just to land on the next one as another one collapses down in front of you. Or maybe you'll be riding on a 2-floor bridge only for the top floor to collapse down on top of the bottom one. It's pure insanity. I also like how as the race progresses, more pathways will open up or close down. Something the previous Motorstorm games did well was allow for alternate routes, and each vehicle has its own pros and cons to taking certain pathways. You wouldn't want to take a monster truck on a skinny, winding pathway, or a dirt bike across a deep, muddy valley. Apocalypse sort of has that same mentality, but the game is far more linear than its predecessors. I found myself exploring alternate routes just to see what the map looked like, or what sort of scripted events would happen there as opposed to, oh, I'm driving a buggy, maybe I should go this way instead. I'm not saying it's better or worse, it's just different. I can appreciate when a mainline entry in a franchise tries to shake up the formula, and that's definitely something they've done with Apocalypse. Something this game does have in common with past titles though is just a sheer variety of different cars, trucks, bikes, buggies, and other vehicles to play with. Each vehicle actually feels different with varying stats for each one. Monster trucks are going to be much stronger than rally cars, for example, but they'll have a lower top speed and be less agile. Honestly, I found Motorstorm Apocalypse's handling to be less agile than any other game on this list. The physics just felt very loose and a bit unresponsive, almost like there was input delay. It was like I had to choreograph my moves way ahead of time. That's fine and all when the chaos is unfolding far ahead of you, but that's not always the case here. It's frustrating as hell to have your race ruined by a piece of debris you can't even see, or an explosion that flings you off course, forcing a reset. This happens more often than you might think, and it ruins the flow of the race, constantly having to reset and get back up to speed. The game thankfully does give you tools to come from behind though, boost being a major one. Boost in this game is always available, but it's not unlimited. You have a set amount you need to ration out. If you push too hard, you'll overheat and blow your car up. I like how you can drive through water to cool off and refill your boost quicker, or if you're in rain, maybe you can ride that boost a bit longer. Apocalypse also has takedowns, sort of. If you press square or circle, your car will skid left or right into whoever's next to you, potentially knocking them out of the race. The wrecks in this game look, okay. I wish the cars and trucks had more deformation. I want to see proper destruction. I want to see body panels flying off. I want to see sparks and destruction. Why is it that the world can deform and have all of this crazy detail, but not the vehicles we're driving? I will say though, I do love seeing bikes, ATVs, and other rideable vehicles wreck, due to the game's ridiculous ragdoll physics. Some of the funniest wrecks I've ever seen in a video game happened in Motorstorm Apocalypse. You can ragdoll the various NPCs that are on the track too. Sometimes they'll even get caught on your car and you can drag them around over jumps and curves. It's so stupid, but it's fun as hell. One last knock against Apocalypse before I move on to the next game is its lack of modes. In the main campaign, only 2 modes are available: racing and elimination racing. Racing is what you'd expect past cars to make it to the end. Elimination works pretty much just like how it does in Burnout. After a set time, the car in last is eliminated. There are more modes in Apocalypse, but ultimately most of them are locked to the multiplayer, which shut down in 2018. I would love to talk about this more in detail at some point, but seeing as it's not available anymore, I don't think it's worth talking about in this video. Maybe I'll save that for a future Motorstorm specific video. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. Overall, I would still recommend Motorstorm Apocalypse. It's probably my least favorite game in the mainline Motorstorm trilogy, but to me it feels sort of more like a sequel to Split Second. The vibes are the same, they look similar and should be similar on paper, but in practice they're not quite the same. I think Split Second is the better game, but Apocalypse has its place on your shelf too. Check this one out. We are finally here. We're on to the final game of the video. So far we checked out Need for Speed Most Wanted and Dangerous Driving, 2 nearly exact clones of Burnout Paradise and Burnout 3. We also checked out Split Second and Motorstorm Apocalypse, 2 crazy over-the-top games I think Burnout fans will really enjoy. But to me, this next game is hands down the best Burnout clone backbone of them all. It shares elements of all 4 of the previously mentioned games and ties them up into one nice, neat package. Enough stalling, let's dive into Ridge Racer Unbounded. Ridge Racer Unbounded was released on March 27th, 2012 on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and 2 days later on March 29th, 2012 on PC. I'll be playing the PC version of the game today. The game kicks off with a cutscene introducing us to the world of Shatter Bay, a city overrun by a gang of badass street racers called the Unbounded. Your character joins the Unbounded, and your goal is to rise the ranks and progressively take over Shatter Bay, district by district. It's essentially the same story as Most Wanted, rising up the ranks to become the city's greatest. It's basic, simple, and it stays out of the way most importantly. But like I said earlier, I've never felt like racing games even need a strong narrative anyways. But unlike Most Wanted though, Ridge Racer is a linear racing game. You won't be driving through Shatter Bay, finding random cars or anything like that. Instead, the city is broken up into 9 districts, each having 7 events to complete. After completing each event, they pay out a score, essentially what is XP, that not only progresses you towards that district's score limit to complete the district, but also towards your character's overall level. As your character levels up, you'll unlock new cars to use in different modes. The progression in Ridge Racer is pretty fast. I felt like I was unlocking new cars and districts regularly. The cars in Ridge Racer aren't licensed, but I enjoy how they look. They're very clearly inspired by real cars with muscle cars, supercars, coupes, and trucks to choose from, each having their own stats like acceleration, top speed, drifting, handling, and strength. None of the cars are customizable beyond their color, and even then, some of them don't even have that option. But like I said earlier, that's okay. I'm not a huge customization guy anyway, as long as each car has more differences between them than just their appearance. I noticed a big difference between various stats between cars, especially the drifting stat. Drifting was a huge part of previous Ridge Racer games, and it's really no different here. A car with a low drift stat might not even be worth drifting. I found myself having to really lean into a drift early so I didn't bounce off a wall. Whereas with a car with a high drift stat, I could start to drift way later than I should have been able to and still come out on top. I could also hold a drift for far longer before it wanted to grip back up. The speed difference between a low and high leveled car is insane too. The gap is huge, and I really love that about Unbounded. You really have to find a car that not only fits what event you're competing in, but one that fits your driving style too. And you have to be adaptable because you won't always have the best car available for an event, especially early on. You can always go back and replay events with a better car if you choose to. Combat plays a major role as well, and it is very similar to Burnout, but with some differences. For example, in Burnout, boosting into the back of your opponent would give them a huge shove and potentially take them out, but it wasn't a guarantee. They had to hit something. In Unbounded, the easiest way to dispose of your opponents is by boosting and then tapping into them. It's almost a guaranteed takedown every time. Even just smacking into their side while boosting can result in a takedown. They don't have to hit an object to be taken out of the race. The takedowns in this game look so sick too. They're almost comical with how many times cars will flip and roll after a wreck. Even when it looks like they shouldn't be flipping, that car will be flipping. So many of the objects in this game are destructible, many of which you'd never expect to be destructible, like support beams and concrete barriers. I love when a car flies into one of these objects. The camera goes into a slow-mo shot and there's this subtle zoom. It's badass as hell. With all of this destruction, there ends up being a ton of debris on screen, sparks flying, cars on fire, things exploding. There's a crash cam for when you wreck as well, but it acts a bit differently. Instead of the cam following your car, it stays put and zooms into the wreck from afar. The screen turns black and white, the music turns down. It's obvious that the game is trying to make you feel bad for wrecking, but man, come on! Look at it, these wrecks look so cool. I had a smile on my face the entire time playing this game, whether I was wrecking someone else or wrecking myself. On top of those car-on-car takedowns, Ridge Racer Unbounded also has environmental takedowns and shortcuts. It's sort of like Split Second, same idea anyway, but the execution is different. Instead of triggering them remotely, in Ridge Racer you have to crash your car into whatever you're trying to trigger. For example, there might be an overturned tanker ahead of you. Boost your way through it and boom, it explodes and it sends out a shockwave that takes out anyone around you. It makes using your boost more strategic. Do I use it to get ahead on a long straightaway, or do I save it for when I come up on a hazard to take out multiple enemies with it? Or maybe I use it to crash through the environment and short my way around a turn. The game game has so many different shortcuts, each track having different buildings and locations to bust your car through. And just like the crash cam, the game has this badass camera angle showing your car bursting through the rubble. This was my second or third time playing through this game, and it still didn't get old seeing these. The game just has that wow factor, you know, it oozes style. The exact style that I love to see games from this era. I know some people are going to see this video and hate the visuals, I get it, it's not for everyone and it's a divisive issue. All of the brown and muted colors with all of the bloom and lens flare out the ass, but truthfully I love it. Ridge Racer Unbounded is stylized, it has an identity. I really love how they've moved things off the hood and put them in the environment, like the gap between you and the cars around you, as well as the lap counter. I would have liked to see them take this another step further, maybe like how Split Second has it on your car, or maybe just have the boost gauge down there on screen. I'm not sure why your current position isn't shown in the environment too. Either way, I'm a big fan of this sort of thing. The soundtrack is another highlight. It's a mix of past Ridge Racer songs as well as modern, well, at least at the time of release, modern EDM. I don't know much about EDM, but something about hearing scary monsters and nice sprites by Skrillex in a game makes me laugh. You just had to be there, right? Either way, it fits the game so well, and I found myself cranking the music and bobbing my head while playing. Other artists like Noisia and the Crystal Method also contribute tracks. None of this would be worth a damn if the game didn't have excellent replayability, and thankfully it does. There are a ton of modes to play, most of which will seem very familiar to Burnout fans, but with different names. Domination races basically function like the racing in Burnout. Cross the finish line by any means possible to claim first. These differ from Shindo races, where shortcuts and takedowns are disabled. Shindo races are more about raw speed and track knowledge. They had a nice little twist to the formula, but I think they also take away part of what makes Ridge Racer Unbounded so fun, the destruction. I'm just glad that this is a mode and not the core game. Drift Attack is very similar to the drift challenges in Burnout Dominator, where you're earning points while drifting to reach the score limit in a certain amount of time. It's perfectly fine. I usually suck at drifting in games, so getting 3 stars during these events felt like I had actually accomplished something. Frag Attack is essentially road rage, where you're trying to wreck out as many cars as possible within the time limit. Sometimes you'll get to choose a car, and other times the game will hand you this big rig and let you have at it. Seeing a truck of this size plowing through multiple cars, flipping and crashing, it's chaos. It's such dumb fun and a nice break from the racing. Lastly, and definitely the least, we're on to my least favorite mode, Time Attack. Now, I'm not sure what they were thinking here, but really this mode should be split in 2. The first being a traditional time trial where you're just trying to put down a hot lap on a track available in the rest of the game. There might be, I don't know, cops trying to chase you, but it's nothing too crazy. My issue specifically is aimed at the second quote-unquote mode, what I'm going to go ahead and call Stunt Trial. Why Stunt Trial? Well, every single one of these events takes place on a stunt track. By stunt track, think lots of ramps, half pipes, and elevation changes. These courses aren't available in any other mode, just Time Attack. Along the way, there are these blue tokens that you have to hit to give yourself a little more time to complete the course. So what's the issue? Well, to say it plainly, it's the physics. They just don't lend themselves to this type of gameplay. The car feels so heavy and clunky, trying to hit all these precise jumps along with making the necessary adjustments to hit the tokens along the way. And yes, if you want the max score, you need to hit the tokens. You can afford to miss a few, maybe 3 or 4, but nothing more. There were times where I'd boost on a jump, and so I'd clip a beam or something above me and cause the car to freak out and tumble around. Or even one part where I managed to land on a roof I definitely should not have been on. It just all feels very tacked on and frustrated me more often than not. These are the modes that I don't even bother playing if I can avoid them on replays. It's just a bizarre inclusion. There is one additional mode I want to talk about that the devs have included outside of the single player campaign. This game has a fully functional track builder. Yeah, so it works on a grid system, and as you progress through the campaign you unlock more tiles to play with. You can basically make your own city, filling it up with whatever events you want, using your own tracks and your own rules. For the video, I just decided to stick to making a very simple oval with a bunch of jumps and explosive trucks everywhere. And it went about as well as you'd expect. Jumps were leading right into bridges, roadways were almost entirely blocked off by obstacles, and slow-mo kept kicking off every 3 seconds from all the explosions. It was just pure chaos. But it got me thinking, this would be so much fun with your friends. Or what if you're a streamer with your viewers, or even with random people online, making and sharing tracks, being able to easily download the top rated ones and play them with your friends, or making your own custom campaign that you can run through to add longevity to the game. Any game developers out there watching, please consider adding this to your game. It is such a cool feature. In conclusion, Ridge Racer Unbounded is a phenomenal game. Sadly, it sold extremely poorly, and Bandai Namco haven't released a mainline Ridge Racer since, and I think that's a damn shame. Ridge Racer Unbounded is one of the easiest games I've ever recommended in my life. Sure, maybe it's not like the other Ridge Racer games, maybe it's not the greatest game ever, but it's damn good fun. And I've been seeing this in reviews and comments and other things around YouTube and social media. Oh, it's not a Ridge Racer game, it's not a Ridge Racer game. Stop. There are plenty of great games in long-running franchises that deviated from the core gameplay, but they were still great. Ridge Racer Unbounded as a standalone game is phenomenal. I find myself coming back to it again and again and again. It is absolutely a hidden gem and something you should check out. And there you have it. That's 5 Burnout clones played and reviewed. If you've made it this far, and if you have, thank you, it's time for my closing thoughts. This took far longer than I wanted it to, but I'm happy with the results. I learned a few things too, one being that I need to play more Need for Speed games, but most importantly though, I learned that Burnout clones aren't as common as I thought. Burnout truly was a special series, and the fact that it's been dormant since essentially 2008 really bums me out. We have plenty of options nowadays for fun racing games, but nothing has ever quite scratched that itch for me. With that said, I want to turn the discussion over to you. What's your favorite game on this list? Or what's your favorite Burnout clone not on this list? Did I get something wrong? Please let me know in the comments. I would love to read your thoughts. This video has been another labor of love, and I just want to thank everyone for their patience and their continued support. My name is Mercy. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a good one.